Well, good evening, everyone. Dr. James Lyons-weiler coming to you from the WWDNYK studios in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, uh, home of IPAC, the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge, and home of some very special people to me, known as family. We are here tonight with a special guest who has a great deal of experience in many different things that matter to you today. The name of the show is Unbreaking Science, and we have a medical physician, tried and true, a person that I know and love well. Welcome, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. So crazy times these are. We have factions in society arguing about what the science actually says. And I say it's about time. The public has grown really interested in what science is and how it works. And this is one of the benefits, I think, of having this debate right now that's happening all across the United States about whether or not people should have the right to say no to a medical procedure uh, known as vaccination, and or whether we should just vaccinate everyone because, well, they live and breathe still, so we should vaccinate them. And you just had some recent experiences in New Jersey. So how did that go for you? Tell me all about that.
Well, it was a wild day. I was in the office all day on Wednesday seeing patients, and then I left at 4:30 and went to the airport, hopped out there and got down to Trenton and had a decent night's sleep. And got up early the next morning, got picked up and got taken in up to the Capitol, and we spent the entire day there. I think we got there maybe 9 o'clock. And what was really interesting, the first out of the box experience that we had is that we tried to go into two different doors where apparently the people, the activists, the women and the men who've been going in those two doors for weeks, maybe longer, of where they've gone into the building, they had them both blocked off, and we could get into neither one of them, and because they put up the sign that says for employees only.
Oh,
And so when we tried to go through the first door, which is the place where they generally have the little metal detector and you put your purse through there, they said, oh, you're not an employee. You need to go down around the end and go in that door over there. So we walked over there and we went to go in, and the guy came up, and as we were standing there, taped a sign to the door that said employees only. And we finally convinced him to open the door. And actually, Susan that I was with, she actually had her phone on to record it because he was like, you can't come in here. You need to go somewhere else. You're not allowed in here. And she said, I've been coming in through this door, for weeks. He said, well, you can't come in here today. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting that this is a public building that taxpayers in Trenton sort of pay for. I suppose we should be able to come in through this door. He said, so if you want everything that this building has, I can go into the closet and get you a bottle of bleach and hand that to you if you think you are entitled to that too.
whoa.
And it was like, yeah, it's pretty contentious, like right out of the box. We hadn't even had our first cup of coffee yet.
Wow. So basically, they're making you crawl through shards of glass that they have sprayed gasoline on and set on fire. They're not going to give an inch. They're not going to give you access even to, no, you can't even come in here. They're ready for a fight. That's their technique, is to try to label doors. That's really interesting. So
Yes.
that tells you where they're coming from. They're actually afraid that there might be some voices of reason that might actually say words that fall upon the ears of other people who might actually respond to voices of reason and compassion. That's incredible.
So
So
then we
what's
walked,
on the line? What's on the line
then
for
we,
those people who don't know? What's on the line in New Jersey right now?
they voted to remove the religious exemption. And that was what we were there to try to fight. And, Bobby Kennedy was there on Monday, Tuesday, and I was there then Wednesday night and all day Thursday. I think Dell's going up on Monday because they're voting on the amendments on Monday. But we ended up, tell you the rest of the story, we ended up walking clear around to the front part of the building and coming in through security. And as we were walking along the street to get to the front of the building, there were hundreds, and I mean hundreds of people. This is 8:30 in the morning, already lining up to be there to protest all day. And I think at the end of the day, when I actually went outside at 2:30 to give my little 10-minute little presentation, go team rah rah, I would guess there was somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 people that had been out there all day with signs and horns and blowhorns and whistles and trying to get the senators' attention to let people know that they were standing against this bill. And the bill was to remove the religious exemption. They were, at first they said they weren't going to vote on it, then they were going to vote on it. And I think it went to the floor to vote somewhere between 4:30 and 5 o'clock. At the beginning, they said they did not have the votes. Of the 11 legislators that I talked to throughout the day, some of them were senators and some of them were representatives, and the representatives were saying, oh yeah, it's really heavy duty in there. The guy who's the head of the Senate is really, really twisting arms, and because they were down by one vote, and when the vote actually went through, they actually won by 2 votes. And so they really were strong-arming people. We had heard rumors that they were threatening people with just, talking about things about their past and their reputations. And so it was really, really ugly. And I'm telling you, I don't know how those women do it, James. I don't know how those women, not only in New Jersey, but in New York, and even in Colorado, go there week after week after week. It was just exhausting to try to talk to those people who'd already made up their mind. They had nothing to say but disparaging comments about the parents that were there. Even the ones that were trying to be a little bit more like, okay, I'll listen to you, were not, and they would get all huffy and turn around and walk away. It's really an ugly, ugly process. It's really way too bad to see it. Whenever you've done any lobbying, and I have done a fair amount, not in New Jersey, but in other places, you get to see up front and in your face how ugly the process really is.
Yeah, so actually, I have to go on the record and say that I don't lobby. I run a not-for-profit, but I am entitled to go and educate legislators or committees. But I have to tell them, this is the science that I know. Make up your own mind. I feel bad for the position that you're in, but I can't tell you what my opinion is, which way you should vote. Make up your own mind, which in a way is kind of more powerful, I think, because it gives them the information. Here it is. It's your job to make up your mind. And although I may personally have a position on something, I technically am educating, and people have to understand that last year I was in 8 states in 30 days during one part of the season, and I was, I think, in 9 states in 30 days in another. So it is exhausting, but what I see happening is, dialogue that wouldn't otherwise happen. The best position, if I were pharma, the smartest thing they could do is stop pressing to take any of these exemptions away, because it stops the conversation cold. The biggest mistake that they're making in the history of vaccination right now is to try to take away religious exemptions in so many states, as if they can win in the marketplace of open marketplace of ideas, as if in the United States they're going to be able to shut down free and open discussions when we have the First Amendment. They've done it in other countries like Australia, but it's impossible for them to win. I'm the eternal optimist on this. Time will out, because the people who used to not vaccinate, who start vaccinating, and the doctors stupidly give them 5 and 6 and 7 vaccines in one shot, well, they're going to turn around and say to their legislator, okay, I used to like to golf. I used to like to go for walks or walk my dog. I'm spending full time getting you out of office now because you did this to my child. When you make a child's injury a political feat of somebody who maybe you even used to politically support, it's death to that political career. There's no doubt about it. And we're going to create new politicians. We're going to create new people that run for office. And I know you're tired. He said you're tired, but we're creating a new culture here in the United States, and it's in its seminal stages, where we have a culture of respect and a culture of mutual admiration, and really seeing the beauty in the wisdom of the minority. And that's what the science says. There's a minority of people that don't do as well on the CDC schedule. It doesn't mean they're not important. They're equally important. And we're in the United States, where we protect our minorities. We're not about squelching their voices, and that's the America I'd like to live in anyway. So, and although they took this vote, what were the amendments that they were trying to add?
Well, the one amendment, which is really kind of silly, and I think it's going to blow up in their face, was that you had to be fully vaccinated to go to public school, but they would accept exemptions in private schools. So
Really?
that means if you've got money to pay to go to private school, then you can pay for your essentially a pay for your exemption. But if
So
you
the
don't,
people who have money for private school are entitled to worship freely in New Jersey, but the people who can't afford to go to private school are not entitled to worship freely in New Jersey,
and it's pretty, and what's
right?
interesting about that
Hmm.
concept is that it's the Democrats who voted that in, and the Democrats, particularly in New Jersey, who are supposed to champion the poor, the undertrodden, and there's a lot of poor and undertrodden places in New Jersey,
Yeah.
and so I think that's going to blow up in their face. I think it's really going to blow up in their face, which will. Hopefully Dell will be able to do some things on Monday to kind of diffuse that and keep people fired up. It's because we have to keep the pressure on, and it's exhausting. And the women who are in charge of, and the men, there were a lot of really important, strong men at the White House, at the courthouse yesterday, and we would walk down the halls, and there were hundreds of parents sitting in the hallways with their children,
Sure.
and the senators that they liked and they knew that was on their favor, they'd all break out in applause and to support them, to know that they were there to support them, and the other ones, they would try to like stand up and tell them things which they were not interested in hearing. Like there was one senator that I talked to, and I'm so bad with names.
That's
I just
okay.
really,
It's
I don't remember
probably
which.
best. It's probably for the best. It's
So
okay.
because he was saying, well, I think everyone should be vaccinated with every single vaccine, and I said, and why is that? He said, because my sister had polio. I said, so if your sister had polio, why is it important to get vaccinated with chickenpox? And he didn't have an answer for that. And then I said, we haven't had polio in the Western Hemisphere since 1991. He said, yeah, and I want to keep it that way. I said, so we're going to vaccinate our children with 4 doses of a polio vaccine against a virus that no longer exists in our environment?
Right. Was he?
And
Did you also get to tell him that there's more cases of vaccine-induced polio in the world now than there are prevented by the vaccine?
well, you have like a few seconds to talk to these
I
guys.
know. I
And
know. I
so,
know. It's not
and
a
I,
judgment.
and
It's
I,
just a question, right?
No, I didn't get to say that. And there was another thing I wished I would have said to another senator when she kept bringing up, you're a physician. I respect what you have to say, but you're in such a minority. And I wished I would have thought to have said right then, yes, and a minority opinions are constitutionally protected in the United States. But
Exactly
I
right.
didn't think about that right then either. I mean, it's a real heat of the moment thing. As you know, you've done it, and
Yeah.
you can only say so much. And you've got probably 6 to 10 sentences max that you can
Mhm.
say in that very short period of time when you're standing there with those people,
That's
and
right.
they're nasty and kind of haughty and they're super arrogant. It's an ugly process. It's really ugly. Or people just walk away and say, I'm not speaking to you, and literally toss their head up and walk away.
Yeah,
So
I've seen that where people walk away in a huff, and that's actually the physiological process that happens in the brain is very well known. The amygdala is activated. They get a rush of a certain hormone, and it's fight or flight. They're afraid to talk to you. Here's what I see happening is that the Democratic Party in the United States has a new toy. The new toy is easy corporate money, right? And they've been jealous for forever of the easy corporate money that they think that the other side is getting, that the Republicans are getting from big corporations, whether it's steel, the steel industry, the energy, the coal, the gas, the oil, military, industrial complex, easy money, party politics, easy money. You have to have this position. It's our platform, party politics. And with the Democrats, for years representing themselves as the party of the people. Now they've got this pharma money, and the pharma money is easy, and it's oh my gosh, look at all the things we can do, and so they have to answer the party bosses upstairs for their own position. They're not voting their conscience. That's not the Democratic Party that I was part of when I used to be a Democrat. And so the problem is that the Democrats don't realize once there's fire, if pharma wins, which they won't, but once this fire sweeps across the United States and all exemptions are removed for mandates, for vaccines, the pharma's going to leave them high and dry. This is a short party. The Democrats are going to suffer from a serious political hangover. This is a lose, lose, lose for the Democrats, no matter what they do. Because if they lose the bid, then the community is going to understand, oh, these people are not our friends. If they win the bid and vaccines start injuring everybody and pharma walks away with their coin, then they're left holding the bag for all the vaccine injuries and the blood's on their hands. And so it's insane that they're taking this on as the people's party, so to speak. It's absolutely crazy. This is social. My commentary here is not political. It's actually a social science commentary.
You know, the same gentleman I was talking to you about that I just mentioned about the polio vaccine, he was saying, I just am relying on Senator so-and-so. And he said his name, who is a physician. And there was a guy standing beside of me who I thought was just brilliant. And he said, and he was a black man also, and he leaned forward and he said, but aren't you supposed to vote for what you believe is right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're voting based on what this guy told you. What if he's wrong? Then what does that do to your vote? And I thought that was just brilliant. It was just brilliant.
Right.
And it's one of the other senators and we were standing outside of rooms. There were two rooms there. One was for the Democrats and one was for the Republicans. And they were having conversations about appropriations. They were appropriations discussions. And so I said to the one woman who I had a fair amount of time to talk to her actually, and I said, so we know that there are, family history and sibling history in terms of vaccine injury is the one area that is not in medicine that is not taken into consideration at all. And we know that there are genetically susceptible pockets of people that are more susceptible to injury. And we know that we don't test for inborn errors of metabolism before we vaccinate. And so now if you're going to make these vaccines required, there's going to be a sizable population of children that are going to become sick. What is that going to do to your appropriations and your budget to fund for all of this health care for these vaccine injured kids for life, not just for like a couple weeks when they have an ear infection, but for their chronic illness for life. And she just like never really thought about that and just kind of moved on,
Yeah. So maximum vaccine enforcement equals maximum vaccine injury. If they successfully vaccinate and carpet 100% of the population in the United States with a full childhood CDC schedule and adult CDC schedule, when those mandates come, all they're going to accomplish is to move the needle a few percentage points up in terms of compliance, and then they're going to find all the families who stop vaccinating. When I was in Connecticut, I educated the committee that, a lady on the committee took a pile of papers and said, these are the exemptions from New York State that were philosophical exemptions. And these are the ones that said that they were religious exemptions. And of that, she took part of it. She said, this part, they also said that they were afraid of the vaccines in some way. They had some concern over the safety of the vaccines. And she goes, that's how I know you guys, pointing to the crowd, are hiding your philosophical exemptions in religious exemptions, and you're not entitled to that under the law. And so when I got up and I said my points, which I had 20 minutes, and then I had like 30 minutes of questions, it was great.
Wow, that's huge.
It was fantastic. I said, of course, people in Connecticut who have medical problems with vaccines that science hasn't caught up with yet have to hide in your religious exemptions because your state isn't smart enough to have philosophical exemptions. That's the purpose of philosophical exemptions. They provide a safety valve because science doesn't know every adverse event. Then the vaccine safety passive vaccine adverse event tracking system is designed to not know about adverse events. It's intentional. The medical doctors are required and recommended to report vaccine adverse events. The ones that are on the table, they're supposed to absolutely, it's against the law for them not to, that are on the vaccine table that HRSA puts out. And the ones that they think might be due to the vaccines, or they don't think that might be due to the vaccines, they're recommended. I think we need to change that where it's mandatory that we just track total health outcome awareness in patients in every health practice and see what medical interventions are causing harm. Why make it about vaccines? Why do we all have to get in the nitty gritty in the business of how medicine does its business, or how patients are tracked by medicine? If I ran a medical clinic, I would make sure I had total health outcome awareness. I would use artificial intelligence and machine learning to tell me, hey, you just took on a hot lot of vaccines, or you just took on some medicine that's hurting your kids. because that's compassionate medicine. It should be the first thing that we do. We have the technology to do this. It's unconscionable that we don't. We're left fighting it out between each other over that. So, this is not just happening in the United States of America, people. Of course, we had arguments that there was a measles outbreak in Samoa. And so Dr. Tenpenny has been a very vocal voice on the actual history of how that outbreak in Samoa came out, and she's provided an article for the public to read, and she's engaged in discussions on it. And so I'd like to, if we could, Sherri, move over to the outbreak in Samoa, the alleged outbreak in Samoa, how it came about, and whether let's talk about what role vaccines may have played in making people sick and die in Samoa.
Well, I wrote about that a while ago. I probably
Hmm.
should have reread the article before the interview tonight. I apologize for that. There's been a lot of water under the dam since that time. But I
Sure.
tried to provide a timeline of when things started happening, and it was interesting to me that the outbreak started happening after all these vaccines started arriving on the island, and so. And they have really still, to my knowledge, correct me, James, if I'm wrong, haven't really released what were the strains that actually happened, that were actually the most prevalent in circulation that were causing the measles. And why was this measles outbreak so particularly virulent when Samoa has had measles forever and has been treated naturally by vitamin A and vitamin C by holistic practitioners on the island? And now suddenly there's people that are in the hospital, they're admitted to the hospital, they're critically sick, which just really hasn't happened before. Now, one could actually say that, and many of them had been vaccinated once or twice, with
Hmm.
1 or 2 doses of MMR before they actually even got into the hospital. So one could argue that because we are vaccinating over and over again with all these different vaccines, that we're weakening the immune system, and that the viruses that are in circulation are becoming much more virulent. And we knew that from Prevnar. We've known it from Hib. We saw it
Sure.
with the adult pneumonia vaccine, that as you start to eliminate some of the lesser virulent strains of those pathogens, nature abhors a vacuum. And so the more virulent ones fall into the gap and come to the forefront, that are resistant to antibiotics and are not eliminated by any sense of vaccination, if it worked at all. So we're seeing this, we storm in, we storm the front, and we know that measles has a life cycle of about every 5 to 7 years, and that we are going to see outbreaks of measles irrespective of vaccination rate every four
Sure.
to seven years.
Sure.
And it's just an opportunity to like ramp up the hysteria to go in and vaccinate all over again. And then once
Hmm.
they do that, like they carpet bomb the entire country with their vaccine, then they go, okay, done. See ya. We're out of here.
Right. So, on the logistics of the vaccines that were shipped there, if we look at the provenance of these vaccines, I was in touch with Edwin Tamasis, and he was the person that was distributing life-saving vitamins and supplements, and he was arrested. And then I don't know what his fate is. I've asked him for an update, but he was arrested. He's been released since. I made bail, I guess, for daring to distribute what the World Health Organization also was
Should have
distributing.
been doing.
And yeah, and yeah, they kind of slowed down their distribution of vitamin A and other vitamins. And so, you're castigated if you're trying to help your fellow Samoans by keeping them healthy. And we know that the mortality is reduced if you get too high doses of vitamin A, which should be balanced out by vitamin D, I think. But um, my understanding is that as these vaccines were distributed, let's like go way back to the beginning. The first thing that happened, well before this, was that there were two girls that died from a vaccine that was not prepared properly for each of them. They mixed it with a muscle relaxant instead of, it was an MMR, I guess. So they mixed it with a muscle relaxant instead of with water. The children died, and then the government suspended the measles vaccination program. Now, if you suspend the measles vaccination program for 8 months, you're going to create a cohort of very young children. Right? You're going to create a cohort of children that are susceptible to measles infection. And so then you get a measles infection in there. And you're going to see a high rate of diagnoses of measles, where where the infection actually is comes to the point where it can be diagnosed. But then we had also a problem in Samoa with a lack of refrigeration of these vaccines. And there's no refrigeration in most parts for 50, 100 miles. And you're talking about a climate that these vaccines are going to grow bacterial growth, they're going to grow fungus, and there's no preservative in to prevent it. And so, a lot of the mortality, as I understand it, is that there were people in Samoa who had measles, active measles infection, and they were being vaccinated. And that's a recipe for absolute disaster for that individual. There's a catastrophic reaction if that were to happen, I would suspect. But I want to play a video here. It's not just Samoa, my friends, where we can have something happen like this that could, really confuse public policy, public health policy. Let's watch this video. It's from New Jersey a couple of years ago. See if I can get this to play.
Well, a New Jersey immunization clinic is shut down after an investigation found 5 children were actually given the wrong vaccine. Now, this clinic gives free vaccinations to the uninsured. Mistakes started in June of 2014 and happened as recently as last week. In one case, a 2-year-old boy was given a double dose of Gardasil. It's a vaccine used to prevent cervical cancer, usually given to teenage girls. It's not known if the mistaken vaccination will cause the children long-term health problems, but Salem County in that clinic is paying to monitor the children going forward.
Just making sure we're putting a lid on the negative aspects of this program. It's an inappropriate medication, obviously, for a 2-year-old, and it was given in a double dosage.
Now, the 2 nurses who ran the clinic have resigned. The hospital says that it only provided space for the free monthly vaccinations and has no oversight in the operation.
Okay, so the 2 nurses in Samoa that administered the incorrectly prepared vaccine, they were charged with murder, and they actually pled guilty. So there was no trial where the evidence was brought forward, that the evidence could be considered about why did they administer, what does the autopsy say, and so on. And yet the government suspended the vaccination program. It wasn't anti-vaxxers who suspended the vaccination program in Samoa. There are historical records of measles infection in Samoans many, many years ago, where the children of American sailors were doing just fine with measles. But the children of Samoa are poor. They've been poor for decades. Poverty is a real thing there. It's a very, very problem, especially in the more remote areas. And so the nutrition is not there. They get either a measles vaccine or the measles. Their immune system is wrecked. They come up with some symptoms. How many cases of measles in Samoa were due to vaccine rash because the child couldn't handle the load of the antigen that was in the vaccine? And how many of these kids died due to a reaction to the vaccine? We don't know the answers to these questions because science, so-called science-like activities that has substituted for science, it tells us that nothing's wrong with vaccines. Everybody gets the MMR. No one has ever been hurt by the MMR at all. The worst you're ever going to get is maybe a cervical injury or some fever or something. And so we don't have all the answers on Samoa. And you brought to my attention a different article as well by Miriam on Vaxter. And so I found that for people watching. Update Operation Vax Samoa. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I want to try to promote your website and the message here.
And I spoke with Miriam earlier tonight, and she's actually going to, there's some additional updates since that was published right around Christmas time.
Yeah.
And she's going to update that article tomorrow.
Oh,
so
exciting.
So if you're on the Vaxter email list, you should be getting that out this next week. So.
Yeah, that's good to know. So I want to push everybody over to this article tomorrow. Then, we can't have a public health policy that's based on a pack of lies. Even if they were to manage to take away exemptions in all the states, permanently remove the American citizens' ability to worship freely, to not have aborted fetal cells injected into their children. And those of you who are new to the show, Unbreaking Science are saying, well, Lyons-weiler, he doesn't know what he's talking about. There's no aborted fetal cells in vaccines. Just take a look at any of the many presentations that have been given. Marcella Piper Terry did a fantastic job in a presentation up in Michigan where she outlined. You can read articles written by mainstream medicine about why they use aborted fetal cells, which is hokey, really hokey business. There's nothing special about aborted fetal cells or why they would have to use that particular source of human tissue for it, or if they have to use human tissue at all, really. It's cheap, to grow viruses in human tissue as opposed to, growing up antigens other ways, I suppose. But, the reality is there's a stack of cards of public health policy, and that stack of cards won't sustain itself even if they remove all of the exemptions. It's just going to blow back in their face. And so, when they every time that the medical industry, I shouldn't say the medical industry because there's many people in medicine who are vaccine risk aware. Every time the pharmaceutical, the people who make and profit from vaccines come to the question of public health policy, they want to argue that vaccination is safe and effective for everyone. There's no place in this entire world, in other area of medicine, where we say, hey, no problem on a medical procedure, except for homeopathy. But there's also more to the story in Samoa with respect to acetaminophen. So Edwin Tamasisi was actually pointing out that if you deplete glutathione with acetaminophen, then maybe these kids are going to have problems with toxins in vaccines or problems with the infection, and it's a bad thing to do. Well, a couple of years ago, IPAC sent out a letter to 100 deans of schools of medicine, a 3-page letter outlining for them all of the science that shows that after the MMR vaccine, if you follow up with acetaminophen, you can have what did the science say? The science says you can have autism after the MMR if you give the acetaminophen. How many, Sherri, how many of your medical colleagues do you think had the class to write back to this little Institute of Pure and Applied Knowledge that asked them to look at the science and say, thank you, Dr. Lyons-weiler, we were not aware of that. We're going to educate our clinicians properly now based on all these studies that you sent us. How many wrote back to me?
None. I would be more surprised if you got 2 or 3 letters like challenging you and telling you, how dare you try to make that connection. Now that I would believe, for them to take the time to write back and say, wow, this is really interesting. Thank you for putting this together. To have 0 of those back, that's not a surprise at all, not a surprise at all, because they don't want to know. They don't want to know because it would cause them so much cognitive dissonance.
Right.
And what happens is that when you are standing, let's say you're standing on a dock and you got one foot on a boat that's drifting away from the dock and you have the other foot that's on the dock. Once you start getting this information, eventually you have to make a choice. Either hop your foot back up on the dock or hop in the boat and float down the river. Or fall in the water and make a mess.
Okay, so I can understand why they didn't thank me for the letter. It's just a letter. Anybody can write a letter. But Tony Diabasi, he's a grandfather of an autistic child in Ohio, underwrote the project, and he paid for all of the books that I sent, which were the environmental and genetic causes of autism, in which I cite 1,000 studies. So you would think, even there's got to be an iota of scholarly interest in the deans of schools of medicine somewhere. There's got to be a small amount, right? Tiny somewhere. They're like curious. What does the science really say? Is there any curiosity?
For the longest period of time, James, I've often thought that, and you kind of almost have to hold on to that or you get like totally discouraged. That aren't there some people somewhere, aren't there some doctors that are willing to take a look at it? But again, it comes down to cognitive dissonance. In fact, if, one of our first courses that we offer through Vaccine U is this course on vaccines and cognitive dissonance, because it does cause people to, it's a 200-year multi-generational indoctrination with a belief system, not a scientifically founded system, but a belief system. So when you challenge that belief, it causes cognitive dissonance. And the brain is hardwired to not live in cognitive dissonance. Like I was giving that example about 1 foot on the dock and 1 foot on the boat. I mean, it's just too, like, sooner or later. And if you don't want to fall in the water because there's crocodiles in the water. So you've got to make a decision one way or the other. And if you never step that foot out on the boat and you always keep both feet firmly on the dock and you never get challenged mentally, emotionally, spiritually, ethically on any of these things, then you can blindly walk along and pretend that none of the rest of that exists.
You're making me feel wonderful. You're feeding my confirmation bias. Thank you. You're making me feel as though all medical deans everywhere are just so hardwired by evolution and natural selection to never question where their income is coming from, to never question the ethics of what they're doing. And so I can feel satisfied that by running my tiny little Institute of Pure and Applied Knowledge, I'm carrying forward the torch of intellectual curiosity for the next generation. And those who would castigate me for doing so, remember there was a time when you looked at medicine as a biologist and you said, wow, that's cool. You actually said that at one time. When you learned about genetics and molecular biology, when you learned about there's some biochemical pathway somewhere that really turned you on at one time. Surely those brain cells are still in your head somewhere. That circuitry is still there. I live it every day. I'm a free, independent scientist, and I get to read and write whatever I think is objective and closest approximation to truth that I can come up with. I'm not beholden to the people who fund me. I'm going to publish some results one day that people that fund IPAC, they're going to say, oh man, I didn't want that published. Well, I'm sorry. Objectivity in science means I have to publish it. I can't just say, well, my funders might not like it. Sorry, guys. So I can't publish this.
Well,
So,
the people that are the deans and things like that, they are beholden to the pharmaceutical industry the same way the legislators are. If they start getting too much out on a limb and challenging these things, then their funding sources, the money that comes into their medical schools and their universities for their professors to be able to do research and to keep their doors open, that gets dried up. It's one of the reasons why I believe it's the one and only place that I give physicians an out for being illiterate and lazy, is the fact that there are very few of us anymore, James, like you being an independent scientist, Sherri being an independent scientist. I did an interview earlier today with Billy DeMoss, who's an independent chiropractor, and we were talking about the fact that, all of these other people have sold out. They're employees of big institutions. So if a physician wants to take a position that, I don't know about these vaccines, and maybe we should at least be selective, we should take family history, genetics, epigenetics, diet, all these things into consideration.
Data, give me data, feed me data. I want to know. Yeah.
They can't do it. They can't operate from the place of going, I don't think this child or this adolescent or this adult should be injected with this foreign matter because of these data, this constitution. They are at a very high risk of having a lifetime catastrophic event.
Yeah.
And if you're working for the Cleveland Clinic or, CHOP or, wherever you are, you can't do it. You are beholden to your paycheck, to your boss who works for the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. So I at the University of Pittsburgh, I did over 100 research studies where I designed the study in cancer, heart disease, depression, public health. There's so many different kinds of studies that I was involved in because of my gregarious nature, and I like to help people, and I'm curious. And I brought in a lot of collaborative funding. Not once did I ever, 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 ever do any vaccine safety studies. It's not there. There's no vaccine safety studies done in the major universities. They have it all sequestered behind the firewall of the CDC where it's under perfect control. And so I'm not sure if it's cognitive dissonance as much as it is like, well, that's not none of my business. I don't know that, right? Like, do you ever watch the show The Westworld, where the Westworld where the automatons there's a place where you go. It's an amusement park called Westworld, and they're made of automatons. And so there's cowboys and there's bartenders and there's ladies of the night and so on. And so you interact with them. It's a three-dimensional immersive experience. But they're sentient. And there's this one scene where this one guy thinks he's a human being, and he's looking at a door on a wall, and he's programmed not to see it. And the Anthony Hopkins character says, "What do you see there, Arnold?" He goes, "That doesn't look like anything to me. That doesn't look like anything to me." So that's like they're blinded to it. When I was there, I used to lecture my sister, "You have to get vaccinated because obviously it's just a little jab. Put some antigen in, no problem." The abuse of ignorance is how the vaccine manufacturers are getting away with it. So their number one agenda is to keep everybody stupid about this, keep everybody uninformed. And so, it's a great pleasure to bring forward, the real knowledge about acetaminophen, the real knowledge about MMR risk and so on. And it's been a life-changing experience for me to not turn my back on it when I wrote my books and found this stuff out for myself. So, um, this week my halo is glowing especially bright, but I have to give it up to the people in New Jersey who are standing up for science, the people that came to the VI event in Washington, D.C. and chanted that they wanted science. We want science. And that's the thing about the chanting that was going on in New Jersey. When I listened to it, I heard humanity screaming for its survival. These people
Wow.
have
They,
right? They have
yeah.
everything on the line. This is their children. This is their prosperity. This is their progeny, their children, grandchildren, their genetic lineages at stake. Their own genetic lineage is at stake. And so when we look at it like that, I think I'm going to bet on humanity every day. I'm going to bet on humanity, not on companies, corporations. I'm going to bet on humanity to be able to take over, society and take back. We can't do regulatory capture and the people can't get a hold of the CDC or the EPA or whatever regulatory agency is out there that's doing the bidding of the corporations. But we can create extramural institutions and focus on them. And there's more of us than them. We could create 100 CDCs for the number of people who are doing vaccine safety science. We could fund 100 investigators outside of CDC uh, as 200, 400 million people, whatever there are in the United States, and they're all going to wake up and they're all going to say, "Wait a minute, you mean I have asthma? I have allergies because of this? Wait a minute, my child." You know how many people die from asthma every day? 45 people in the United States die from asthma every day. And my estimates are, looking at the data I'm looking at right now, about 100% of asthma is caused by vaccines. About 100%. So when the American public wake up to this, there's going to be a great deal of anger at the agencies. And I'm telling people, don't be angry at the agencies. Turn around, walk away from them, and create your own future. Create a society where we're doing objective science. And so, we just started a new program at IPAC to fund autoimmune research. We're going to be doing the dose escalation studies. We're going to be funding the dose escalation studies FDA has never done on aluminum in mice. We have a brand new project.
Amazing.
And the people are going to fund it. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to ask people to model their best, get their best studs on, make themselves up, be beautiful. I can't wait to see Kevin Barry modeling for autoimmunity. He's going to be great. And we're going to have a virtual modeling event, and everybody put out their best picture, put the hashtag on it, and send them to the website. And we're going to do this upright, and then we're going to go after major donors that want to get to the end, the root causes of autoimmunity. We're not kidding around. We didn't wait around for the FDA to set the pediatric dose limit of aluminum. We did that. We determined what that might look like. We published it. It's peer reviewed. Now we're not waiting around for them to do the right studies on aluminum. And if we're lucky, we'll be able to fund um, both the aluminum hydroxide in infant mice that should be done, a dose escalation to see how many it takes before the infants show problems as they grow. And will they be able to fund the prepubescent mice in AAHS,
Wow.
the adjuvant that's in HPV?
Gardasil.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I only have one life, right? I only have one career, and it's mine to give. So I'm giving it to the people of the world. It's not mine. We're going to do this, and not Chris Exley, but Chris Shaw is probably going to be involved. I talked with him today, so we're
Well,
setting up a future.
Chris actually said that he can't get his hands on that AHS.
Well, we're going to change that. We're going to change that with a legal maneuver. So, I mean, it's in
Well,
the
that'll
public.
be great because I, when I was in the Isle of Man last year, I was there speaking twice, and he was one of the speakers, and we were talking. He kind of lays out his credentials for people listening that don't know. I mean, he's one of the top aluminum researchers in the world. I mean,
Sure.
his entire career as a scientist has always been about aluminum,
That's
and
right.
not just about vaccine aluminum. It's about aluminum in the soil and the air, and emissions and all this
And
other
food.
stuff,
Yeah, food.
and everything.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
when he did his first study that looked at aluminum in brains, I mean, suddenly his funding's gone. He's kicked out of his university. I mean, he's
I don't think he
and
was
all this
kicked
other
out of his
stuff.
university.
No, but he was
Yeah.
like, what are the, set aside, disparaged,
Well,
all
they
this other
gave
stuff,
him a bit of a hard time. What he was doing was he
Yeah.
was fundraising directly from the public through a link, and now they said no, you have to do fundraising through this office. Send the people to this office at the University of Kiel. So go to Chris Exley's link and donate. It's great. He's still funded. He's still doing research. I just noticed that he's actually giving a talk on aluminum and Alzheimer's in a very prestigious event in London. So
Good.
I think his message is getting out. I think we're seeing a turn of society. Did you see what happened at the World Health Organization, Sherry? Where the World Health Organization, watch Highwire from this past week. They're coming out and they're saying, you know what? This is how we're going to fix vaccine hesitancy. We have to have real vaccine safety science. That's World Health Organization saying that.
Yeah, but their distribution letter at the beginning of the year said that their next 10-year push in the Agenda 2030 is
Sure.
that every single person on the planet, irrespective of age, gender, any young, old, everyone will have the benefit of being fully vaccinated.
That's right. That's their agenda. They had that agenda in 2019, and they're bringing it forward as they wrote that in
Much
2019.
much harder at
Sure.
the very beginning here.
Right. And
Yes.
so in order to get that done, in order to do that, what they said this week is they have to do real vaccine safety science and show that vaccines are safe. Wow. What do you think
Well,
what do you think they're going to find if they do
they're gonna
actual science?
they're not going to do actual science. We're deluding ourselves to think that they would. They're
But wait a
going
minute.
to
But wait a minute. Wait a
what?
minute. I thought vaccines were safe and effective. Why do we have to defeat vaccine hesitancy by doing more vaccine safety science? I thought vaccines were 100% safe and effective.
Yes,
Right?
and they will
So,
be and they will be proven to be by their scientists.
but
And I
but
can't
not.
wait for you, and I can't wait for you to get hold of their bogus studies after they've published them, and you get to like shred them, into a zillion little pieces of how they didn't do things right, and they did this and they did that, because that's one of your absolute values in
Mhm.
with your scientific background and your knowledge with where you come from, is to be able to take stuff that they claim is real and you just shred it. I always love it when you write those
It's like
pieces.
shooting ducks in a barrel. It's it's just like that. So anyway, yeah, we have a couple of critiques that we've written. We haven't published yet. We published the critique of the HIVID study. Brian Hooker did a good job too. But there was a study of Tdap vaccination and pregnancy that we've torn apart, and we sent it to the journal that published it, and they wouldn't touch it. They won't publish our critique. So I created my own journal. The journal is called the Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law. And it's peer reviewed. We're going to follow all the procedures required to get a PubMed listed, and we're going to go for PubMed listing. Well, not that I care that it's in PubMed, but I want to make them deny PubMed listing. If they deny PubMed listing, then we can sue them for bias based on, well, we're following the procedure. We're going to sue to get PubMed listed. This journal is going to be huge. It's going to be great because it's a free advertisement for all the objective scientists that are out there in hiding. You have a safe place. You need to get your publication record up because you need tenure. If it passes muster in peer review under my watch as the editor-in-chief, you get a publication on your resume and you're more likely to get tenure. Welcome to objective science funded by the public. That's what this looks like.
Very cool.
Right on. So you're wonderful, and I'm so grateful that you're
And
here.
we need to, we need to follow through with. Remember, we were going to write that whole thing on that pertussis, the whole thing on the. Remember when I gave that presentation
Sure.
and we were going to figure out the time to like write that whole thing up. We
Yeah.
need to try to put that on the agenda for 2020 sometime this year.
I love it. Yeah, let's do it. We have a nice journal that will publish it if it passes peer review. This is necessary, and
Right.
yeah. So I would love to do that with you. Thank you. So what I want to do is I want to give you, a few seconds to close out. What's coming next from Sherri Tenpenny in 2020? What's up?
Well, we're doing several things. One is our next version of our vaccine boot camp is coming online. We'll start marketing in a couple of weeks, and then the open enrollment for the Mastering Vaccine Info boot camp course. This will be the sixth one that we've done. Begins February the 20th, and the course, the open enrollment is for 5 days. The course actually begins March 1st, and it goes for 8 weeks. And we talk about all the basic things. It's a basic core curriculum. Think about it like Vaccines 101.
Yeah.
And what's that we talk about safety, efficacy, we talk about smallpox, polio, herd immunity, how to read a package insert, and the ramp up of the schedules. And in between each one of those things, there's language training to teach you how to appropriately communicate that information without making people mad, and how to get your points actually heard. And what's really interesting, James, is the people that say, well, I've been studying vaccine stuff for 20 years. I'll take your course, Sherri, because it's you. And those are the ones who generally walk away with saying, I learned so much. I'm so glad that I thought I knew so much, but the way it's laid out linearly and methodically puts it in your brain in a different way instead of just a hodgepodge of learning. So the open enrollment of that is February 20th. And so it's kind of neat. It's 2-20-20, so it's kind of like, a good numerology thing going on there.
Right on.
And then we just created, and we're launching within the next 3 weeks, our new, our answer to Facebook. We've been building this with our own code on our own multinational servers for the last 4 months. We've had it beta tested by more than 1,200 people. The current name is vaccinefree.zone, which will go away and become a much more generic name than that. So it's not just about vaccines, but we set it up as a beta test under that name because most of our students and people that knew me, we asked them to go in and kick the tires and, look for misspelled words and stuff like that. So if you're interested, just to see what it's like, it's private. You won't be censored. You won't be deplatformed. You'll be able to make money in there just like you do on regular Facebook. It's vaccinefree.zone. It's functional. You can go in and do it now. And then the middle of February, we're launching our version of YouTube, which is bigger, broader than what Brighteon is. We are in sort of that same space, and it's going to be called Disseminate.tv. And we've already got contracts with people. We've got some of the largest YouTubers that were out there on the YouTube world that were censored and deplatformed that are already ready to make the jump onto our site. And it's you won't be censored, you won't be shut down, you won't be deplatformed, and it's totally secure. I mean, it's really secure. And so that's the 3 biggest things that's coming off in Q1 in my life.
So you're just kind of messing around, right? You're just kind of messing around.
Yeah, Q1, first quarter is we're going to be launching these 3 big things. And so, yeah. And then life goes on, and there's a lot more things to come over the course of the rest of the year. But for the purpose of you and your audience, these are the things that are happening within the next couple of months.
That's cool. So thank you for that update. On closing out, I have a number of people, I've been talking about microneedle patch vaccines, and I want to ask, because people want to know your opinion about the future of artificial immunity where it doesn't involve intramuscular injection, it doesn't involve mercury, it doesn't involve aluminum. You're exposing antigens to the dendritic cells in the epithelial layer or the mucosal layer, even if you put it in the mouth, not a microneedle, because that would be kind of weird. But what do you have an opinion about this microneedle patch vaccination technology?
I don't. Do you?
I really don't know enough about the safety until the science is done. I don't know about the efficacy, but I know
Well,
that
I don't know. I think it should be. I'm assuming it will be safer. I'm not sure about the efficacy.
Right. So let me
know.
describe. If you don't have an opinion about that, let me describe. And I don't have any financial interest in this whatsoever. I'm not like that. So, but if say there's a measles outbreak in a school or a mumps outbreak, and people know that they've been exposed or maybe going to be exposed, there's a risk of being exposed, and they don't want to have a full-blown infection. They want to kickstart immunity against that. The public health officials isolate the virus from a person who has a diagnosis, the medical community, and they actually get the genotype and they know which antigens should be presented to the population. So then they basically ship that information to the local pharmacy that has a printer, a local printer that prints this kind of technology that matches exactly the type that's present in the population, and then you can go and buy it off the shelf without a prescription. What do you think? If you want to.
I don't know. I assume that, maybe there's a possibility that that is going to elevate the toll-like receptors. It's going to turn them on in a certain way. That's, toll-like receptor 4 then activates various things, and that maybe without all of the junk that's in the vaccine, the foreign matter that we've talked about, maybe just a pure, submission of an antigen will do that. But on the other hand, once you understand, and I know you do, but I'm talking globally, how the toll-like receptors work in our body. I mean, they're constantly being vigilant all day long. Every time you eat something, brush your teeth, go to the bathroom, have sex, whatever, you get bacteria into your bloodstream, and the toll-like receptors just like neutralize them.
You hear that, kids? You hear that, kids? Don't do it. You got bacteria.
And so it's like, the whole idea that it's in, when I started studying, and I've done a fair amount of studying as a physician, I'm sure more than most other physicians, about the toll-like receptors, because I think it's just fascinating that they recognize pathogens by pattern recognition. I mean, how godlike is that in our bodies, right? That by pattern recognition. So if they're going to be putting antigens in through your skin, which again is an abnormal way of which the antigen actually gets into your system through your skin, is it just going to be neutralized by the toll-like receptors? Because what ends up happening in terms of immunity is, your B cells and your toll-like receptors and your cytokines in the presence of fever develop something that makes something long-term. Right. So is this just a short-term passage of antigen in your body to kick the toll-like receptors for them to wake up and do their job, and life goes on, and it doesn't have any long-term effect? Right. That's my, just passing by, just thinking about it from a theoretical perspective, but I really have no idea whether or not that would do anything to protect, meaning keep people from getting sick.
Right.
I don't know.
So I don't make recommendations for or against vaccination, but I'm a tech hound. I'm a biotech guy. I come from the biotech revolution generation. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, now wait a minute. They can advertise it. They have us on advertising because it's needle free. You're not going to get injected into your muscle. I mean, who came up with that?
And you're not going to have all that junk in there, right?
Right. Who came up with the idea?
It's a green vaccine.
Who came up with the idea of taking a perfectly healthy person and injecting something into their muscle in the first place? I think it was that they didn't want the anti-vax moms to suck the antigen out, right? That to right from the arm. That you could take a little suction device and get it back out, but this, right? And so this technology is out there. I'm sure there's studies on it, and I'm going to be doing a series of episodes on Unbreaking Science about. That's a great question about toll-like receptors, and it's also a question, does it actually activate the dendritic cells? You get infections in your skin. It's a much more normal place than if you have an infection in your muscle, you've got like a sore wound, a very deep gash, right? You're doing bad. Your worst. Your concern is not measles or mumps. Trust me. If you've got an infection in a muscle, you're in trouble. But if we look at these as a plausible, possible compromise for the people who don't want to be bothered with natural immunity, the lifetime benefits of natural immunity, of never having to go get this Band-Aid. I brought this up to Dell, and he goes, James, get that thing away from me. Somebody's going to come up behind me and slap it on the back of my neck. I know it. So anyway, right. And so the next thing you know, the Gates Foundation allegedly is saying that there's a possibility with this technology to put radioactive labeled dye in it, or some kind of dye.
I did see that.
Okay. To me, that looks like a total misinformation campaign to scare people away from microneedles. Oh my God, they're going to scan your skin and see if you had this or not. And
that's exactly what it's for, right? So it's like proof of vaccination is that we inject radioactive dye in you.
Right. I'm like, no, they're not going to track us with radioactive dye with this technology. But from a purely scientific standpoint, this technology is of some interest to me. Would I use it? I don't know. I'd have to look at the science. I think everybody is interested to see, is it safer? Is it more effective? And most importantly, for me, from a social science standpoint, could it knock the other guys out of the park, the bad actors? Could we have a whole reboot on vaccine technology where, they've held onto these contracts? That's what vaccine risk denialism does. It allows them to hang onto their contracts. And if these other guys could lose their contracts to something like this, I mean, and if choice was respected and it's over the counter and pediatricians aren't reimbursed and given incentive, sure, there's vaccines in the world. I don't care. Let's move towards that. That's the future I'd like to see. I don't care if there's vaccines in the world. Fine, have one. Go ahead. I don't eat beef. You eat beef. Go ahead. I don't care. You know, that's what it should be. It's like it's an option for choice for the type of immunity that you want, right? So I don't know. There's
But that's a really, really good point, though. If something like this actually worked, meaning it did introduce, it induced the toll-like receptors, the dendritic cells, maybe it even increased just a little bit of fever, so it activated the cytokine pathways.
sure.
And you ended up with something that kept you from getting sick, and maybe you were someone who was immunocompromised or had cancer or something, and something like that could work. But to knock those other people out of the, out of the ballpark of injecting foreign matter, that would be interesting. That would be, and particularly in light of the fact, there's a group of people I've been talking to out of New York, and they have a concept, and I'm kind of like sitting on the bleacher seat about this, so I've just heard about it peripherally. It's sort of like if we're going to be forced to vaccinate anyways, if we are going to have to do this, if they're passing these laws and we're going to have to do it, is there some way to create some sort of a technology that could suffice as being vaccinated without having to be injected with all of that potentially lethal foreign matter?
Right. That's
And
why
actually, they've been
that's
actually
why
talking to, who's
that
on their team is Judy Mikovits.
that's why
And so
this
she's,
technology has me so interested, because
yeah,
the only platform left to compete on would be safety.
yeah, exactly.
Right? So the consumer voice
Why
would be
not?
like, hey, if you're going to force this on me, it is going to be safe. I don't care if it's effective or not. I just want it to be safe. So why don't we just do this? Why don't we just call pharma and the vaccine manufacturers and say, listen, if you start shipping saline in in needles in hypodermics, we'll call it quits. Take our money. Go ahead. Fine. We'll inject 72 shots into our kids 72 times. Just leave us alone. Just take the money. We'll still pay you the money. You want the money? Take the money. Just stop injecting this crap into our kids. Right? Well,
But
let's broker a
there's
deal.
still, but that will never work because the real money for them is in the back office. It's on the back side.
Yeah.
You've got a $80 billion vaccine industry and a $1.2 trillion drug industry. So the
That's
purpose
right.
of all of that
That's right.
is the back end. It's the back end to make people sick. So now, we drive lab tests and blood tests and all sorts of specialty tests and X-rays and MRIs and specialty visits with specialty types of doctors for that, or really look at subsets of immune compromised problems. And so we
Sure.
drive the entire industry, and then we end up with all of these different drugs to manage all of these symptoms that we cause by injecting. So it's the back end of this deal is where all the money is for them.
Yeah. So they whether it's intentional or not, they certainly have very large
It's certainly
children's hospitals.
intentional.
They
Oh,
certainly
please.
they certainly have
You're
very
too
large
kind, James. You're way too kind.
they certainly have very large children's hospitals. And as Dr.
Yes.
Ravi from Ohio says, the large children's hospitals are not a sign of health, they're a sign of sickness. So,
Good point.
yeah. All right. Well, Sherri, listen, it's been such a pleasure spending the evening with you. I appreciate you taking the
Absolutely.
time. And we're going to change the world. Stay optimistic, because that's our hope is our best weapon. And creativity, think outside the box. I love that you're training people to know the knowledge about vaccines. We recently at IPAC came into a realization that it's very important to focus on transferrin. It binds to aluminum. The aluminum you inject, most of it gets bound to a transferrin, and so when the transferrin moves it to the bone, it's actually not allowing the iron to get moved to the bone, and so you're going to have low red blood cell count. There's something there. We're pulling on a thread. with the transferrin's not available if you're injecting so much aluminum into these kids. So they should have like high iron load, anemic. It's a paradox, right? So they should. We're looking into that as well. So you're the best, and thank you so much for being on Unbreaking Science. We close out here with some music. By no means do you have to stick around, but I hope you do, because some people dance to it, but you're off screen. So let's see if it plays. This is by
Hi everyone,
Nokomis.
I'm your host,
It's
Dr.
called
James Lyons-weiler,
Unbreaking
aka
Science.
Dr. Jack. In this episode, we're going to review the evidence that science is broken. This is not a news story.
Will be told, the people will know the price of corporate science really taking its toll. Whistleblowers blow, public health data low. They say the science is settled, but how do they
Unbreaking
know?
Science.
Ask questions, critically think, you should try it. It's pure, unadulterated science. Unbreaking science.
Unbreaking Science.
You can't deny it, you sure can't buy it. Fact check, use your brain, don't be quiet. It's pure, unadulterated science. Unbreaking
Unbreaking
science.
Science.
Using the tools of the trade to back up what we say. You can't be silent when it comes to unbreaking science. Let's light the truth up, next level ultraviolet. You got a hypothesis, do a critical test. Make an observation without being biased. Use logic and reason mixed with evidence. Look for patterns and results with significance. Calculate the numbers, real accurate, or else your findings won't be legit. Don't cherry pick, but be skeptic. Cause broken science, it makes us sick. That science is being funded by the very same people that run it, so they can promote a product, so they can make that money. Try not to laugh, cause this ain't nothing funny. All these science-like activities, no joke, they call them studies. Hand-picking sample groups and no true placebos. Losing public trust the more and more that we know. The truth will be told, the people will know. The price of corporate science really taking its toll. Whistleblowers blow, public health data low. They say the science is settled, but how do they know?
Unbreaking Science.
Ask questions, critically think, you should try it. It's pure, unadulterated science. Unbreaking science.
Unbreaking Science.
You can't deny it, you sure can't buy it. Fact check, use your brain, don't be quiet. It's pure, unadulterated science.